listeners. Welcome to the Religious Studies Project. I'm Christopher Cotter. He is David Robertson.
Hello there.
Yeah, and we are the co-editors-in-chief of the Religious Studies Project, bringing you an episode about Muslim... Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Religious Studies Project. I'm Christopher Cotter. He is David Robertson.
Hello there.
Yeah, and we are the co-editors-in-chief of the Religious Studies Project, bringing you an episode about Muslim dress beyond the headscarf, with Liz Bucar, conducted by Candice Mixon. Take it away, Candice.
So I'm Candice Mixon, and I'm meeting with Dr. Liz Bucar at the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion, and we are in Denver, the floor of the conference center. It's very busy. We are on the floor, and there's not a lot of space, so we found a space to carve out for ourselves. So Dr. Liz Bucar is an associate professor of philosophy and religion at Northeastern University. She's a religious ethicist who studies sexuality, gender, and moral transformation within Islamic and Christian traditions and communities. She's the author of 3 books, including the award-winning Pious Fashion, How Muslim Women Dress, and that's what we're mainly talking about today. So thanks so much, Liz.
Thanks
for meeting up with us.
Yeah.
To start, can you tell us what pious fashion is and what brought you to that topic?
Yes, so pious fashion is the word that I use in this book to describe clothing that is both religiously coded as Muslim, so for women trying to be modest in a certain religious way, given their own interpretation, but also intentionally trying to be fashion forward or with the fashion trends. And it's actually not exactly a topic I came up with. It came out of conversations with the women that I'm actually talking to, right? It's really a subject-driven research. Like the focus groups I had, the interviews I had with women, that's what they wanted to talk about in terms of modest clothing. And so instead of calling it modest clothing, or instead of calling it it's not just headscarves, it's really this head-to-toe sort of look in these 3 locations. Yeah.
Speaking of the 3 locations, so your book relates to examples from Iran, Turkey, and Indonesia. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people out there, that might be sort of a random combination.
A little crazy, right?
Ones that don't immediately have commonalities. So I wondered if you could walk us through first just the choices for those 3 particular countries.
Yeah, there's both the case studies both come out of my own sort of experience in these locations, and there's also like conceptual theoretical reason for it. So in terms of my personal experience, like you, my initial research in grad school was based in Tehran, right? It's based in Iran. So my experience, even though my research wasn't about clothing or material culture in that way at that time, it was part of my experience, if not my research. And I had this moment where I moved directly from Tehran to Istanbul in 2004, and having spent the summer suddenly uncovered on the streets of Istanbul. And that was, for me, that was the first time I actually cared about, I was interested in clothing rather in terms of what it did to someone's like character and culture, right? Because I felt really uncomfortable uncovered. Like I'm not Muslim, but still by doing that practice every day, I felt covered with the intention to becoming more modest, to becoming more Muslim, but still by doing that every day in Iran, I had shifted what I thought was appropriate behavior for myself with men I didn't know, behavior in public, how I should dress. And so that was sort of an interesting moment for me. But I wasn't really interested in the question of fashion until I did other research in Indonesia. And I got there and I was like, oh my God, it looks so different here. And like, duh. But when I'm surprised by things, that's the kind of the moment where I lean in a little bit. So like, of course it looks different there. And it didn't read to me as like modest in the way that it would in those other locations, particularly in Tehran or Istanbul, because of the local style cultures and the local politics and the local history of garb and women's clothing and women's dress. And so the 3 case studies kind of come out of my own sort of trajectory, moving through these different spaces, doing other research. But then when I sat down to write the book, I was like, oh, no, I'm going to stick with these case studies because we spend so much time, particularly I think in the U.S., thinking about the Gulf as the origin of all things, all things Islamic, much less clothing, right? And I'm like, I just wanted to decenter that. Like, of course you're going to include Indonesia. That's the most populous nation in the world. And it was a great way to have these 3 case studies. They were all Muslim majority of the cities. That was sort of one baseline for me. And they were all not part of sort of the Middle East, the Gulf, right? Yeah. So that's how those case studies sort of emerged. And then also showing the enormous diversity through those spaces. I mean, I'm really comparativist. So the only thing that really cuts through all my work that is similar is that I like to have many things on the table at once and find connections and differences. So I felt much more comfortable and much more could find more things or could understand things more in depth when I could have more case studies. So I understood more what was going on in Tehran when I started thinking about what was happening, in Georgia or what was happening in Istanbul. So
it's interesting. I think we've had a similar trajectory. I haven't been to Indonesia, but I've spent a lot of time in Turkey and Iran doing my research. And even just going back and forth from those two countries, packing is a nightmare. Trying to get all the right clothing that makes sense for traveling in very different places. And I'm sure you've had this experience too, where your students will often come to it with monolithic. And so I think something like this really helps them break apart those different cases and how different the fashion and style is in all those countries.
Yeah. I think in some ways am I a little bit annoyed that we are still spending so much time in the conversation about women in Islam talking about clothing? Yes, I am also really annoyed by that. This is the second book I've written on this topic, and this is not where my research started, right? But it's partly in a response to the fact that people still don't understand it, and non-Muslims fetishize it and over-politicize it or under-politicize it. They think it means more than it does or means less than it does. They just don't understand the context of when it's happening. That it's either a sign of women's oppression wholesale, they don't understand the choice involved, or it's a sign of a worrisome creep of Islam. Oh, it's coming. Look, all the hijabis are coming. So it's partly, I think, we keep talking about because there's still so much misunderstanding. The other thing that you just sort of raised is, particularly for my students and for a non-Muslim audience, of which I'm really interested in, writing primarily for them, it's a good way into thinking about different Muslim communities in Islam that doesn't sort of start with texts, right? Or political debates. I get into politics and consumption and, but I also get to start with religious practice. That these women, there's not a chapter about the Quran in this book, right? And it was actually really hard for me. I've written another book and it has that chapter on the sacred text, right? I'm and I know that stuff. And I was I have to put that in there, but I don't have to put that in there because the women I'm talking to don't start with quoting to me the Quran. They jump right in with okay, so this is what it looks like here, and here are the debates that were happening, and this is the problems, or here are the pressures we're feeling, or here's how I style my headscarf. They start right in with the decisions they're making every day, and you realize that's where the negotiation of what accounts to be a good Muslim is happening. It's not happening over fights in the text. The women I was talking to, they all agree that, particularly these women who are covered, they think that it is their religious duty. They believe it is a religious duty to cover. That's a given. Yeah. So then the question is, what does that mean? Right. And that's not a textual debate, really. Yeah. It's an everyday practice debate. So it's a way into the religion that actually, once you move through, sort of no, it doesn't mean that, doesn't mean that. Okay, it's diverse. You can then open it up and have a fuller conversation. Yeah. Either in this book, I'm trying to have a fuller conversation, or with my students, or in public scholarship, I'm trying to do about combating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism in ways that's trying to meet my audience at a place that they can enter the conversation with me, I guess.
Right, yeah. So you mentioned Islamophobia. We talked about that for a second before this. And I am interested in just having you say a little bit more about perhaps how your work, by diversifying, whether it's just the hijab or the impressions of Muslim women and their choices or not choices or their culture, etc., if you see it rubbing against and resisting Islamophobic tendencies a little bit, or if you've seen any reaction like that related to your work. Just want to...
As soon as you write anything about Muslim women in the veil, you immediately get hate mail, right? So especially, I think especially if you do it to a public audience. So the LA Times piece I wrote got a bunch of liberal women telling me, liberal non-Muslim women telling me I was doing this terrible disservice to the world of feminism because I was talking about Muslim women fashion, I guess just in a charitable way, right? I was just letting the women speak for themselves, and they were expressing agency and choice. Within structures of, not that it's a completely free choice. No clothing is not happening within a web of,
I have to wear this right now.
Yes, you have to wear.
I have to.
You look really good, and you have to wear that right now because we were at the AAR, right? So there's all. So, side story. I was told the first time I went to an AAR by a senior faculty member where I was in grad school. I was sort of given a list of things that are particularly important for women. Mm-hmm. So don't wear aggressive shoes. Which I'm wearing aggressive shoes right now.
I'm wearing moderately aggressive shoes.
Yeah, your shoes are
medium aggressive.
Mediumly aggressive. I'm wearing aggressive shoes right now. And not to wear distracting lipstick. Mm-hmm. I was told by a male senior professor, make sure I had more than one suit when I went on a job talk because women were judged more by their appearance, and on day 2, I better show up in a different looking suit than day 1. Another faculty member told me, talking about like hemlines. I mean, so much policing of our clothing, right? Even like that's like another whole issue. But partly what this book is trying to get people to think about as well is the own sort of constraints we have. Like, this is not just a Muslim woman problem that like there's expectations on what you wear. But back to your question about Islamophobia, I have found this an interesting way to begin conversations about Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism because so the De Young exhibit's a good example in San Francisco because it's so visual and so material. So the De Young Museum is like I'm from Boston, so it's like the MFA of San Francisco. It's the Modern Art Museum. They have a gorgeous exhibit right now, which is very informed by scholars. They have a scholar board involved and also a local community board that helped out. So it's very different than something like Heavenly Bodies, the Met exhibit, which was not informed that way because the clothing there is both stunning and beautiful, but also shows a great diversity. You could have someone who knows nothing about Islam and the Muslim community walk through and come out. It sort of shifts. I think it pushes back against some of the stereotypes. And I think this is important because we've had a bunch of surveys lately that have told us that, like, basically if you know a Muslim, you're less likely to be, Islamophobic. And we also have the Pew Forum in 2017 had a survey that came out that said that 50% of Americans do not think that Muslims are part of the mainstream in the U.S. So that somehow Muslims are
outsiders.
Always outsiders, right? So you bring someone through this exhibit and you have clothing that is accessible and you have the silly Christian white lady, it's like, oh, I would wear that. It's not so different. And then you have sort of pushing back about, wow, it's really, it's not all abayas and it's not all black. And there is a it's not all black clothing. And there is a diversity of clothing because guess what? There's a diversity within the Muslim community. Yeah. That can be an aha moment for people. Yeah. Or, oh my God, they're not like being forced to wear this by the men or the ayatollahs in their lives, the Muslim men in their lives or the clerics in their lives. Look, there are actually women who are designers who are making a business and a life out of this, or there are women who are using their clothing for social activism. So the young exhibit has really activist wearers and designers as part of it. So like, Muslim women don't need to be saved, right? Yeah. They're like able to use, and the example of clothing, like showing how they are themselves producers and using it in interesting ways. And then again, that mainstream culture thing, like it's everywhere now. And that exhibit kind of, what does it look like at Macy's? And what does it mean that
all the top designers are adding full, modest lines that are akin to people that are in the Middle East that are often becoming wealthier in countries like Qatar and the UAE and whatnot, and trying to also push to that. So that's also interesting.
They're trying, so there's partly, so who the designers are responding to is a certain market, right? But the truth is, I'm looking at what you're wearing right now. You're wearing a modest outfit, right? Yeah. So hemlines have gotten longer, necklines have gotten higher. There is like sort of mainstream. I'm putting my hands up on air quotes. No one can see that.
There's air quotes, don't we?
Air quotes. Mainstream fashion is also like these are tastemakers. Muslim women, wearers, and fashion makers are influencing. I mean, they're all part of mainstream culture. They're producing pop culture. And so if you think about Uniqlo's line or H&M line that people are going in and purchasing, not realizing it was originally developed and marketed to Muslim women, but now it's being marketed as globally sensitive, inclusive, like, it to be cool and hip and sophisticated is actually to be thinking about ways in which this clothing, if you're like a non-Muslim woman, this clothing actually might appeal to you now as like this cool thing, right? This sort of cosmopolitan thing.
Sorry to interrupt the episode, but we just wanted to let you know, to remind you about our Patreon link. The Religious Studies Project has always been free since its inception, but we know that there's a great problem in academia with people not being paid for the work that they're expected to do, particularly early career scholars. And we at the RSP want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So you can help if you can spare even £1 a month by going to patreon.com/projectrs and subscribing. We know that these podcasts are very useful for people who are teaching and people in their learning. So if you can help either by subscribing there or by making a one-off donation using the PayPal button on our website, it'd be greatly appreciated and will help us keep bringing you this podcast for free and fight against exploitation in academia. But now, back to the episode.
So I think that clothing can be this way, again, into if you really pay attention to it instead of just seeing a headscarf, it's a great way to like open up sort of the complexity of these different communities.
Yeah. And then how did you see your work sort of speaking to, I mean, we've talked about dress and contemporary society, and I totally agree. Things like hemlines are getting longer, turtlenecks are in, again, mock necks, etc. are in right now. But what about within gender and religion more broadly? So I know your project is comparative within the Muslim world or within, Iran, Turkey, and Indonesia. But how would you see those discussions kind of fitting in with other discussions of religious clothing, perhaps not just for mainstream America or something like that? Or would you?
Particularly in the U.S. context, you're interested?
Whichever one seems to appeal to you.
I mean, I think, so there's a couple of things. I think you're sort of asking me to expand my work out into religious studies more broadly, right? So for me doing this work, because I'm really a religious ethicist, so the other hat I wear is in different societies of religious ethicists, like the Society of Christian Ethics or the Study of Muslim Ethics. Those have been societies that have been really text-driven, right? So even just thinking about how we study visual culture and everyday practice and material culture and how we theorize that has been sort of a challenge. And that work, I've really found allies in, other places in religious studies. There's a lot of exciting stuff, but like a lot of stuff is kind of in the last decade. So none of it was stuff that I was reading about or thinking about back when I was in grad school. So that's, thinking about, particularly if you're someone like me who's interested in everyday practice, and thinking about how do you like read visually instead of read textually. Those have been really exciting conversations to have. In the U.S. context, I mean, actually, the new project I'm working on, there is a chapter focused on clothing, and I brought up the Met exhibit because we sort of are having this moment in the U.S. where like religious clothing has gotten a lot of attention. I mean, the Met exhibit, that Heavenly Bodies exhibit, which is an exhibit, those who don't know, of Catholic-inspired couture, basically, and also some things from the Vatican, about 40 pieces from the Vatican itself, is the exhibit had like 1.6 million visitors, and more visitors than any other exhibit ever.
It was huge.
Ever at the Met. Like, right, when I went, it was like lines around the block, and we're just
it was physically like immersive. I mean, it took me hours to get through it, and I went to the cloisters, and it was
pilgrimage.
It was a pilgrimage.
Epic pilgrimage.
Really was. You had to go on top of a mountain to get there.
And the lighting's low, so you're kind of confused, and the music is loud. Like, the music is very dramatic. And it's a sort of like, so what's interesting is like who that drew in. But what's also interesting about the exhibit is, I don't know how you felt about going through it, there wasn't a lot of context. So although there were beautiful pieces to look at, there wasn't a lot of filling out the history of them or the symbols that we saw there. Or the Met Gala, which is like the gala that opens it up, where you have like Rihanna dressed as basically the Pope, and she's like so fabulous. But this sort of appreciation for that aesthetics, but maybe that's not coming with the understanding of, there's been
a religious community.
Or some problematic pieces of it. So it's Robert Orsi wrote some great stuff about it. It's a very sort of sexy exhibit. Lots of it is low cut, and like really the body is put forward, and it's coming at a time when we're in the middle of this big crisis, this big sex abuse crisis, and there's no conversation about that in the exhibit. So again, I think that obviously people are interested in religious clothing. They're like, you get them in the door of the Met to see it. So again, it becomes an opportunity to have more complicated conversations about religion. That's sort of where I'm thinking about sort of going.
Cool. And you mentioned something you're working on. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe we can have a little preview or a little interesting.
Yes. I have a book that's under contract, again, with Harvard University Press, which was wonderful to work with on Pious Fashion. It really helped me think about pushing or writing for a different kind of audience. And writing a different voice. So I have a book under contract, which is right now, my working title is called Stealing Your Religion. And it's a book that comes out of frustration in my classroom, sort of stilted conversations about cultural appropriation that students love that word and love that phrase, especially in terms of religious racial borrowings, like stealing things from white people, stealing things from Black communities and Black culture. They were using the word in addition, also in terms of religious sort of stealing, but not. It was sort of shutting down conversations, type opening up. So this book is about the sort of ethical, muddy ambiguity, good and bad, of these sort of borrowings of a religion, particularly by people who themselves are not part of those communities. So we're moving in the U.S. to a situation where the majority of Americans are going to have no religious affiliation, right? We're going to be nuns. N-O-N. Yes, right? Not And so I thought there's actually something really interesting for me to think about this, because I actually am myself, I mean, this is probably too much information, TMI, but I'm myself baptized Catholic, but I'm not I haven't been practicing since I, was in the household, like 10.
Yeah.
So I'm a non-religious affiliated person who has made a career out of studying religious communities.
Right.
So that's kind of weird. I also...
Same, by the way. Almost exactly.
And it's sort of interesting to think about that and think about the positionality of that and what the politics of that. And so this is a book that kind of goes through different things that I have a lot of experience with. So, for example, I take students on a pilgrimage to Spain every year as part of a study abroad program. We do the Camino. So I'm taking mostly non-Catholics on a Catholic pilgrimage as part of a course. And the majority of them have this life-changing experience, even if they're not religious. Okay, so what is that? Like, how is that? Why are they, like, what are they trying to get out of an experience as a quote-unquote non-believer, as an outsider? What are they searching for? How do they understand this sort of spirituality versus religion sort of divide that people just assume as a truth? What is that really? So this book is like looking through different kind of case studies. And I'm kind of doing all the icky things and then thinking about them, right? So I'm sort of stealing your religion and trying to like unpack it and problematize a little bit. And that audience, that is really a book written for white women. Like, right, we're hearing about the problem of white women. I want to think about, especially about, like, if I am a character in that book, I'm sort of thinking about particularly white women moving through these spaces and sort of the ethics of that.
Yeah, I was thinking about when you mentioned that. So obviously that project is pretty contemporary, right?
Yes,
and as is Pious Fashion.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking about, even if I consider examples from that Met exhibit or just other ones where you see elements of covering, such as habits, such as other forms of veils. Mother Mary is, presented as wearing a veil. Those aren't problematized as much as this abject reaction that comes sometimes with Muslim forms of covering.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting when you sort of track a historical trajectory of different forms of covering up.
Yeah.
And then now that mainly one culture seems to be focused on as the one that covers up, there's more of an adverse reaction or something. Or at least I think, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so again, part of my my resistance of writing this last book was that, oh my gosh, there's so much scrutiny on Muslim women and so much attention to what they're wearing. And this book in some ways is part of that conversation, right? It's like I'm also, or adding to that problem rather, right? Like I'm also scrutinizing and looking at women. I'm hoping that because they are really pushing the research and their voices are really pulled out, you also see how they themselves are involved in like surveilling each other and scrutinizing each other, and they're part of that mechanism. I think in my classroom, my students are usually really shocked to find out that the veil is not a big deal in Muslim communities until, like in Egypt, until the British decide it's a big deal.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And sort of seeing how it's like, oh, it's their fault. Like it's not, and it's, you think, or the British come in, they're like, basically this veil is a problem. It's a sign of Islam that you're not the same of us. We're going to take it off. And then like Muslims being like, whoa, you want us to take it off? We're going to put it back. So like that interaction is usually a wake up moment for my students. So we're in a really kind of exciting, interesting moment, right? Where we have our first elected representative heading to Congress. But I don't know if you've seen this yet, but this week it just broke that one of the first things the Democrats are doing is changing a rule, a 181-year-old rule that's on the books for what you can wear on the House floor. It says you can't wear hats. So in order for her to make sure she feels like she can walk in the first day, they're going to change. So like we're in this interesting moment where like, okay, I'm sorry, Muslims are mainstream in America, right? Like we're at this interesting moment where it's really showing us these sort of structural racism and structures of religious discrimination that we still have like, on the books.
Yeah, there's so many examples. I mean, the history of the places that you've studied, of Turkey and Iran specifically, hats, oh my gosh, such a big deal.
Yes.
Putting them on, taking them off, putting on the tie, taking off the tie.
Yeah.
So the clothing is where those decisions about modernity and about culture are being negotiated. So it makes complete sense to have a book like Pious Fashion, I think, to do some of that work. And I've found it works really well in the classroom, and I'm sure you found as well that for your students, they're reacting really well to the work.
So
right?
my favorite thing to hear is that it's working well in classrooms, right? That is like the greatest compliment, right? That you can like pay me, because I was trying to write in my teacher voice, and I was trying to like, the way I teach is a lot of stories. And so I was trying to tell the stories and let the women tell their stories. Right. And I just think the more storytelling we do in general in the classroom and in our writing, it's very effective in terms of shifting perspectives. Oh, I mean, another thing that I think that's happening right now that's really interesting, or sort of showing, like, again, this, like, we're in a sea change in the U.S. right now. The NYPD is being sued by a bunch of different Muslim women for basically having their headscarves ripped off for mugshots. And again, there's no reason why my hair wasn't this color a couple of years ago, and it might not be, hair is not a distinguishing feature.
Cool. Well, I think this was super helpful. Hopefully people have gotten a bit about Pious Fashion and check out your book. Any other final thoughts for us?
No, thanks for this. This was really fun. Even though we should confess, we were literally sitting on the floor.
We might take a photo just to let everybody know. We'll put it out there, but we are sitting on the floor. It's very empty.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to go back and keep conferencing.
Yeah, that's right.
We're going to keep conferencing.
In our conference gear.
Yes, in our modest conference gear.
There's Pious Fashion everywhere, and what counts as Pious Fashion here is old suits. Anyways. Sensible shoes and old suits.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz.
I was thinking that it's very different nowadays than when we started off. When we were introducing interviews, it was always one of us that had recorded, and sometimes both of us, or we'd both been involved in some way, with me editing it and you writing the page and everything else. And now, of course, it's people from around the world that we only know through this, and we get these interviews and we're hearing them the same as the listener is. It's a nice surprise for us. We
Well, we do a bit of editorial.
Well, sure,
oversight,
but we're discovering things more like the listener is now, I think.
Exactly. It is fantastic. So thanks so much to Candice. We hope we will get some more interviews from you. And next week we've got a couple of returnees to the RSP. So Chris Black, who's been doing a series of interviews for us of late. This is the third that she recorded at the SSR. It's about the landscape of atheism and non-belief. And it's with none other than Chris Silver.
Our old pal Chris Silver, yeah. Good to have him back on the show.
He obviously began back in the day somewhere in Tennessee, but he began on the RSP as an interviewer, and quite a few of our first couple of years podcasts were produced by him. He's written responses. He's been in video episodes. He's been in one of our discourse recent episodes. He's been a trailblazer for us and a real trooper. So we're glad to have him getting to speak about some of his own research. I have committed to write a response to that as well.
I imagine you're looking forward to finding out what you're going to write as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So
excellent.
We'll see.
We were just saying just now, we're looking at the schedule coming up. Scheduled into May. We've only got a few more slots to fill, and they're filling up quickly. But we're also looking ahead to the various conferences that are happening over the summer. Looks like we're going to have a lot of activity at the EASR, which is great, with lots of friends and colleagues on the continent there. So that'll be exciting. We haven't talked about the NAASR, but luckily we've got all these new interviewers in North America, so I'm sure something will happen there. SSR, I hope we get somebody back there again next year. That's a conference we don't have a lot of other contact with, I guess. It's not our field. And BASR, of course, in September, which I've yet to really think about, but that's coming.
It is coming. Wow, yeah. I think we've still got a couple of months to even think about abstracts and things for that. So,
but we will be recording our Christmas special there, of course, as ever.
Always.
Yep, indeed.
That's, from sort of, I was going to say the end of March, but this is the beginning of April, David.
Yep. Yep. Spring is here.
Yeah, just on you go, folks. So go out and enjoy the sun, or if there's no sun, don't.
Yeah, enjoy the rain.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
The Religious Studies Project is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions. The RSP is produced by the Religious Studies Project Association, SCIO, a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, charity number SCO 47750.
Brought to you by founders and editors-in-chief Chris Cotter and David Robertson, and our managing editor Thomas J. Coleman III. Our features are edited by Jonathan Tuckett, and our Opportunities Digest by Ella Bock. Podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, with audio editing by Gregory Schneider and Samuel Ward. Social media managed by Ray Radford, and sales and marketing by Sammy Bishop.
Don't forget you can support the project by using our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links, or donating at patreon.com/projectrs. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, iTunes, and other portals.